Good morning. Very glad to be here. I'm Phil Weilerstein. I'm the president and CEO of VentureWell, which is an educational nonprofit that focuses on supporting and stimulating technology innovation and entrepreneurship in higher education and research in the US and around the world. And I'm very pleased to be here with a spectacular group of panelists today to talk to you about raising money and getting the fuel in the tank to drive the venture forward. We're just going to transition directly to the panel, I think, and I'm going to ask them to come out and join us here as I introduce them. Sorry, get to the right page here. Our panelists this morning are Becca Keaty, Derrius Quarles, and Andrea Sreshta. And each of these folks has done some incredible work in creating a groundbreaking and innovative approach to creating impact. Very different sectors, very different models in terms of how they've gotten the resources to drive their work. And they're going to share with you a little bit about their thinking, their strategy, a little bit about their story and path, and hopefully enlighten you with some thoughts and ideas that might apply to the work that you're undertaking. To kick things off, let me just give you a little bit of background about our work and sort of the range of things that we are involved in. And I'm happy to talk more with anybody after, but our organization is in place to enable young people like yourselves to take great ideas forward and make big impact on the world. We work with primarily folks who are trying to move a scientific or technological innovation to scale and create big social impact. And we've done that for a couple of decades, working with people who have for-profit and nonprofit ambitions, and often those models actually evolve and change as they grow and scale their organization. I think we're going to hear a little bit about how that's happened in real time here. But one thing I do want to point out to you, and I'm happy to talk afterwards about, is that our organization, through funding and support from the Lemelson Foundation, from the Autodesk Foundation, a variety of other philanthropies and government sources, is able to provide grant funding and other non-dilutive funding to help support the initiation and very, very early steps towards advancing ideas to scale. So if you've got ideas like that, I'd be happy to talk with you. And I'll try and bring some flavor of how non-dilutive funding can work in the context of the conversation that we're going to have here. So what I'm going to ask you each to do first here is to just give us a quick introduction of yourself and one sentence or so on the organization. But if you could put it in the context of your mission, I think that would help set the stage for the conversation.
All right, I'll get us started. Good morning, everyone. My name is Becca Keaty, and I am a resident here in Chicago. I am a 20-year veteran. I served in the Army National Guard for 20 years and retired 3 years ago. My organization that I work for is called Bunker Labs, and our mission is to help military veterans, military spouses, and members of the just general military community start and grow small businesses. Was that good? That was brief, right? Okay.
Derrius?
Good afternoon. Or is it morning? We're still morning.
It's still morning.
It's still very. See how early it is. I'm like, good afternoon. You could tell it's very early. Derrius Quarles, originally from Chicago, literally went to Kenwood Academy, which is about 6 blocks away from here. So these are my old stomping grounds. This is like my old neighborhood. Barack Obama's home is actually not too far from here. So it's great to be back here in a place that, you know, has that fond memory for me. Now living in Atlanta, creating impact all across the world. One of those ways I'm creating impact is through the Venture $1 Million Scholar, which was founded in 2009, and I went to my first CGIU in 2010. So I've been involved with this work for quite some time. I believe that was like the second year of CGIU being in existence. And what we do at $1 Million Scholars, we assist high schools in preparing their students and being ready to fund their higher education. So we specifically assist in reducing debt, and making sure that education is accessible financially. That was very important for me as a youth. Grew up extremely poor on the south side of Chicago, would not have been able to fund my higher education without scholarships. So with the name $1 Million Scholar, that sort of comes out of the fact that before I graduated high school, won over $1 million in scholarships, and that significantly changed my life. So really, how do I help other students be able to do the same thing and access those same resources?
Great.
I guess good morning / afternoon. We'll just leave it at that. My name is Andrea Sreshta, and I'm one of the co-founders of LuminAID. I live in Chicago now. I'm not originally from here. I'm originally from Houston, but I moved here to go to business school just a few blocks away at Chicago Booth. And I just stayed here ever since because it's been a really great place to grow LuminAID. And at LuminAID, we make portable solar lighting for humanitarian aid and camping. And I'm always that person with a prop, so I'll just go ahead.
Please. I was actually just given one of these as a gift, and it really works well. Voila.
I know, it's a really cheap trick, actually. This is, there's a solar panel, so the idea is these can be used even when places where they don't have electricity or people don't have access to batteries, and as an alternative to candles and kerosene lanterns.
Great. Thank you. So you can see it's a pretty diverse set of ventures that are being pursued here. What I think we're trying to make sure that you get a sense of is the pathways may be similar, may be different, and that you need to be very open-minded in your approach to how you're going to fund your work. Just to sort of set the stage a little bit, just a quick go-around. How many people are in your organization that are on staff, and what proportion do they represent of the total effort in your quick estimation?
Towards the effort in fundraising?
No, well, total effort in the organization, yeah.
Okay. Yeah, our team full-time is about 26 people, and we have about 80 volunteers that function as city leaders. We were founded 4 years ago here in Chicago, and we're now in 26 cities nationwide.
Great. Derrius?
$1 Million Scholar is a three team members strong. I have 4 companies. Overall, I manage about 30 folks in total.
And do you use volunteer effort?
No volunteer efforts.
No volunteer effort.
LuminAID is 7 full-time, including my partner, Anna, and I, and a very healthy dose of interns, all paid.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And our organization has about 50 full-time staff, about probably 100 consultants we work with on an intermittent basis, and we leverage probably 300-400 people around the world. The reason I raise this is that when you think about fundraising, you're often thinking about resources, and I just want to, we're not going to dwell on it because the focus here is really on financial resources and fundraising, but fundraising and effort that others can contribute can substantially offset costs for particularly things that are involve a lot of people-to-people contact. So I'm going to ask you each the same question here, and I think we're going to hear some very, very different responses to this. The question is about your value proposition. And let's go in this order. What is your value proposition to your users? What's the value proposition to your donors or your funders, your investors? And are there other stakeholders that are important?
Sure, so value proposition to users is through our products, basically, and we have probably 2 different types of users. There would be like people who are going on camping trips and doing stuff outdoors, and so the idea is you can have like an easy-to-use light source that doesn't need batteries, you can charge it on the go, all of that. And then in terms of the humanitarian aid side, there's actually within that 2 categories, which is beneficiaries of like who are given our light who live in places that don't have stable access to electricity. So kids can use our lights at night to study in places where they wouldn't otherwise have a source of light. And then the other side of the humanitarian aid is specific to disaster relief aid. So post-hurricane, post-earthquake, quite frankly, post a lot of man-made conflict issues, complicated things in the world as well. So people who are kind of just displaced in general due to various events. And then, so that's the user side. In terms of investors and stakeholders, so we have two investors, Mark Cuban, which came via Shark Tank.
No big deal.
So yeah, very lucky break, to be honest, but he's, I'm always happy to answer questions about what it's like. I get asked, like, how's Mark Cuban? So, and then Blake Mykoski of Tom's Shoes is also an investor. And for them, I mean, LuminAID's a for-profit business, and both of them are very socially motivated, and that it's a good fit because they're very supportive of the work that we do, even outside of just like day-to-day business. We do a lot of work with charities and organizations, and when disasters happen, and both of them just really care, I think, about LuminAID's mission as well. But then, I mean, the returns, I'm sure, are nice as well. So that side of it is just business as usual. And then the last part of your question was, oh, other stakeholders. Yes, this is an important one for LuminAID because those are our conventional investors, but we were students for a long time when we were starting this, including like at business school, and actually my partner and I met when we were in architecture school. That's where we came up with the design for our lights. And we did everything we possibly could to leverage student business plan competitions, other types of grant funding, and we've benefited from some various very generous situations in terms of grants. Like, it's funny that this has a FedEx logo. We actually have a grant from FedEx, and business plan competitions. And so I tend to communicate with all of those stakeholders in the same way that I communicate with Mark Cuban's. Like, generally, how's the business doing? Because people have more kind of skin in the game, even if it's not on paper, in terms of all the things we've benefited from.
Yeah, Derrius, same question.
For the user, so coming at it from the perspective of the students. Students are primarily the primary beneficiary, right? So they're utilizing our software platform at $1 Million Scholar. They're the ones who are going to get the funding and go off and get access to the higher education. So the value proposition there is, of course, first and foremost, right, the ability to afford school first and foremost. That's sort of the number one thing. I think for a lot of us, not necessarily always sort of first and foremost understanding the privileges that we may have, affordability wasn't something that may have ever was a concern for you personally. But for a lot of students in the United States, interestingly enough, higher education, like the question is first affordability. Can I even afford to go to this amazing school that I've been accepted to? So that's the first thing. We want to make sure that higher education in America is affordable, economically accessible to everyone. And then the next value proposition beyond that is, if we can make it affordable, can we help you graduate with as least debt as possible? So it's affordable now. Now, how can we ensure you graduate with little to no debt? So those are the core, two value propositions for the students. In terms of who pays for the product, schools and parents. Essentially, they want to see students succeed. They want these outcomes for the students. So both from little as debt as possible, as well as making it accessible. I think accessibility is a more important question for them than the debt thing. But parents, debt becomes more of a concern for them because often they're the ones co-writing on these loans. They're the ones who have skin in the game on these loans. So they become more concerned about the debt than the student is more often. So it drives them, of course, to be invested in our product offering. Beyond that, of course, stakeholders, including the government, including other nonprofit organizations that we work with, where they work with a certain population of students. They want their students to get access to the platform because they don't necessarily provide what we do, but they want them to get access to it. So very diverse.
And you're funded. Do you take grants, or
We do not take grants. We do not take grants. So we are revenue generation primarily.
Okay, great. So value prop for the people that we serve is that we are going to give them the networks, the resources, and the tools that military veterans and their spouses need to become successful in starting a business. We support the entrepreneur for the entire life cycle of their business creation, which is really what makes our organization unique. There's a lot of pop-up 2-day boot camp events, but if any of you tried to start a business, you know that it's not done in 2 days. So we really support the entrepreneur from the idea phase to invoice, is kind of what we like to say. I think the value proposition for our funders and our partners is that there are 40,000 veteran service organizations in the United States alone. And while there are a lot of needs that our men and women who have fought for our country have, there are not quite maybe as many as there should be that support the skills and the strengths that they bring to the table and all of the leadership abilities that they have, and especially in starting businesses. So we are largely funded by corporations, corporate grants, private grants, family foundation grants, so opposite of you guys, like a lot of grants. Grant writing all day over here, so we can talk about that. But it's, so that it's very different. And they really, all of our funders are really inspired and are committed to working with us because they can see the positive net of one veteran starting a business. That person, man or woman, has the opportunity to provide a better life for themselves. They have to network to be successful in business, so now they have a strong community of people around them. Their families are supported, their communities are supported. And, just the world is a better place. Not to make this a FedEx commercial, but FedEx was founded by a veteran. Other very large companies like Comcast, NBC Universal, founded by a veteran. And there's just so many companies out there that you just wouldn't even know that that's the case. Other stakeholders similar to you is we have also competed in a lot of pitch competitions. Last year I competed in WeWork's Creator Awards. We advanced to the global competition and I pitched in New York at Madison Square Garden. And I would really encourage you, we raised about $600,000 doing that competition, which also led to an opportunity for us to have about a $1.2 million in-kind donation from WeWork. So if you are not familiar with that program, I would like to plug that because it's open to everyone, for-profit and nonprofit, and it's an incredible opportunity. So large partners like that are giving, unrestricted funding is literally one of the best gifts that you could ever compete for, and those stakeholders are important for us too.
Great. So we're going to talk now about flavors of money. So money comes in a variety of flavors. They're all a little bit different in terms of how you approach them, but they have some things in common, and I think we'll see some of those things come forward. But I want to start with a little bit of the history and arc of your work. So you started off doing some crowdfunding, as I understand it.
Yes, that escaped me in my previous answer. But yes, crowdfunding is also, so I think when you have a product like we do, crowdfunding is definitely a very viable option to pre-sell your product, take some capital in advance, put that to work to manufacture the product. So it's kind of the nice thing about having a product is also when you're pre-selling and kind of taking money from your customers in advance, they have something they can track in terms of the deliverable when you finally fulfill the campaign. And our first crowdfunding campaign, we did it back in 2011, and we raised $50,000 on a goal of $10,000. That goal was very misguided. In hindsight, it was going to take a lot more than $10,000 to start LuminAID. But it was our first big push towards scaled manufacturing of our product. And back in 2011, $50,000 on crowdfunding was a big deal. So it was like great press and publicity. These days, the bar is quite a bit higher in our kind of category of product. And then we've turned back to crowdfunding on both Indiegogo and Kickstarter continuously when we have new product launches. And yeah, it's been a really great way to, I think it's an alternative to taking dilutive capital, basically, because when you have to manufacture something and you need working capital and you need inventory, that can get expensive. So it's all also about the timing of when you're kind of raising the money.
Yeah, that's a great point. So do you retain control of your company at this point?
Yes, so Anna and I combined own well, like more than 50% of the company, and then we have a couple other investors.
Which is an important thing to think about in your journey, because if you are looking to raise a lot of money, you're probably not going to control your venture unless you are really effective at generating revenue very quickly. And people often think about this from a very kind of passionate point of view. I know with ventures I've started, you want to retain control, you want to retain equity, but you also want to grow. And so you need to think about the classical way to describe it is, do you want to own a big slice of a small pie or a small slice of a very big pie? And thinking through very carefully how you approach that. It's always, in my opinion, a good idea to bootstrap. And so talk to us a little bit about your bootstrapping strategies, because I know both of you have been pretty scrappy in how you got your venture started.
Certainly. My philosophy, and I'm very unapologetic about this philosophy, bootstrapping isn't like my suggestion. It really is like what I live by. That's what I stand by. As an entrepreneur, I don't think you get to call yourself an entrepreneur if you're not willing and ready to bootstrap. And that's what it means to me. But I know that's like not necessarily always going to be a popular opinion, because when you think about what success is defined as in today's world, in a very real way, not talking about your impact entrepreneurs, but when we think about entrepreneurship as a whole, people are being defined as successful just for raising capital. To raise millions of dollars, it's as if you've built a company, right? That's the way they talk about it in the Wall Street Journal or in TechCrunch. It's genius raised $6 million. It's like they haven't built anything yet. They haven't generated $1 in revenue. They're unprofitable. In fact, they're $6 million in debt now, essentially, right? They've given up a portion of the company to say, I promise you, we can get this return on the money. And of course, it angers me in a lot of different ways, because, I know a lot of entrepreneurs who are actually doing it, like actually building, actually scrapping, actually profitable, who find it difficult to raise money for whatever reason. And so my idea is always revenue generation is the best form of capital. It's the flavor that tastes the most to me. Like I'm vegan, in that sense, right? I only like the revenue, me personally. It's not to say I don't understand the strategy and the landscape of putting yourself in position to be able to raise venture capital, to give up equity and then, get capital from that. I just think that so many young folks have been convinced that the only way to do it, what success looks like, ideally, is to give up equity. And I think that's sort of what I fight against, is that that's not what real entrepreneurship has been historically. It's been a history of scrappers. It's been a history of people who believe in their idea so much that I don't even want to give up any of this. Like, I know how much this is worth. Why would I give it up? Right? I know how much this equity is worth. I don't want to give that up. I'll take on debt before I give up my equity. So that's how I want you all to believe in your ventures and your companies. If you're gonna take that risk and giving up all your time and your resources, if you really believe in it, you wanna be very, you wanna be stingy, with that equity. You wanna be stingy with that venture. Only give it up if people are really willing to, give you a large amount of money, right? What you really deserve. Don't give it up just because you feel like that's what success looks like. So yeah.
I'm going to join you in that fight, because I totally agree with you 100%. And when we counsel veteran entrepreneurs, we give them honest advice. That's, the authentic part of the nature of being a nonprofit, is to help them and make them understand the truths about the business that they're trying to start. But we often will recommend that they bootstrap. And when they get a little bit further along, if it makes sense for their business to take an investment, then we have connections to that as well. I think, bootstrapping in the sense of a nonprofit is a little different. So I come from a for-profit background. I started a social enterprise here in Chicago called Open Books about 10 or 11 years ago. It's a literacy nonprofit. And I, started that at the heart of the recession, which was a really exciting experience. But when I came to Bunker Labs, I had come from more of a corporate business role, and I was doing some fundraising. And I had to remind myself that, to your point about loving the money, in a nonprofit, you raise the money every year and then you spend it. And so, like, someone who's like really wired to make a lot of money or like want to get the money, It's a weird sort of shift in feeling to be like, okay, well, I'm going to raise this amount and then I'm spending it in a year. So every year we raise and spend and raise and spend. So when you're scaling a nonprofit, it's a little different because you really have to sell the idea and the impact, and it has to be done with passion. So almost everyone in our organization is a veteran or a military spouse. And we, you need that first yes. And I know it sounds kind of corny, but the minute you get that first yes and you put your all into securing that funding, whether it's a grant, it's a corporation, be choosy about who that first yes is, because if you can strategically secure a really strong first yes of funding, it will preclude to more funders. JP Morgan Chase was one of our first founders. When I started the organization, they had just given us a pretty significant 2-year grant. To have JP Morgan Chase back your venture, your nonprofit, is a pretty good checkbox that you're valid and you have the right intent and that you're doing things with fidelity. And then from there, we got another yes and we got another yes. And, that's sort of the nonprofit form of bootlegging, doing your research, finding the appropriate grants, applying. Fundraising is a lot of work. You can talk a lot about fundraising, you can read a lot of articles about fundraising, but if you're going to do fundraising well, you have to put in a lot of sweat equity and a lot of work.
I think it's a really good point. I want to come back to the point you made about passion, because if you don't believe in what you're doing, nobody's going to give you money. But if you believe in it, it's actually, I wouldn't say it's easy, it's actually a lot of work, but it's easy in the sense that you don't have to do a lot of convincing. You just need to be there to convince the right people. So the question is, how do you get there to convince the right people? And the build that you described is exactly the challenge that lies ahead of all of you. So you have a network. You may not think it's a grand network. You're building your network here. This is a phenomenal place to build a network. But you're going to have to figure out how to translate that into action. And if you're doing a nonprofit, you're translating that into an action plan that is evergreen for your fundraising, that you're always raising money. That's what I do. Raise millions of dollars a year, and believe it or not, it's fun. It's always hard work, and it's always something that you don't know how it's going to turn out. So you have to enjoy that kind of roller coaster ride and the drama that goes along with, will you be able to convince this person? But the process and the stages of commitment that you're going through with the people that you're working with to give you the funding are not that different in the for-profit and nonprofit world. And so maybe from the for-profit side, describe, sort of the how the passion comes into this and what form credibility it takes in pitching, securing, and then fulfilling on the commitments that you've made to people who are providing resources.
Absolutely. So I echo the sentiment that when you have momentum, like you have some seals of approval, the next one becomes easier and easier and easier. At the same time, however, I think a lot of at least LuminAID kind of continuing to grow with supporters intact is just accountability as well. And I think crowdfunding is the best example of that. I think our customers in a crowdfunding campaign care that, they're supporting a small business to some extent, one that has an eco-friendly product, one that works with charitable organizations. But at the end of the day, it's also just they want their product in the mail sent to them on a decent timeline, right? So I think accountability and just kind of following through in some cases is also a very valuable thing in managing stakeholders. And so,
Yeah, I want to ask you this in the context of reputational capital.
Okay.
Because that's very important on the nonprofit side, but it's also important in the for-profit side. And you got funding from Mark Cuban, right? So how have you leveraged that, and what's that done for your reputational capital?
So working with Mark has been great. He has a small team that manages all of his Shark Tank investments, and he's super hands-on to the extent that I don't know how he does it. Makes me feel lazy. But and yes, having a name like that attached to your business is huge. But at the end of the day, actually, the person who cares least about that, funny enough, is Mark. He cares that we're working hard, not that he's it's not that he doesn't want to make connections and things like that, but I think from his point of view, it's not going to work if like his entrepreneurs aren't working hard and being accountable. So that's kind of step one. And then he's also helped us in, I think a lot of people think like, oh, I need investors to get relationships and introductions. And you do to some extent wherever it's helpful, but it's not a must. And the thing that Mark has helped us most with actually is building behind the scenes infrastructure. So helping us, like his team has helped us manage our Amazon pages, and he's got a lot of expertise in digital marketing. But those aren't, it's not like Mark was emailing, his like other billionaire best friend being like, check out LuminAID. So that's the other thing I think too to consider when you're considering investors and taking on investor capital. I would say be strategic about it in terms of what value they can bring to your company. And it's not always the like flashy introductions, even with the most well-connected of people.
How about you, Derrius?
In terms of reputation, I think you hit it on the head earlier. It is everything. Like it does mean a lot. And I think in today's world, I guess I'm always like the young wise guy in terms of these conversations. Sort of always trending more towards the philosophy of it all, in the sense that I truly do view entrepreneurship as this, thing that deserves sort of to be dignified. Like it is a way to go about doing this thing. It is a philosophical approach to all of this, to me, in the sense that I really do view myself as an entrepreneur. Entrepreneurship isn't just something that I happen to do. It really is who I am. And so I think that in and of itself is why reputation is so important. Because, to fail is one thing, but to not be accountable to me is an entirely another thing. Because you can fail while being accountable. Yes. And that will actually boost your reputation. That's, you really went out there and you put the effort in. You try. You tried to make it work. It just wasn't ready. It wasn't the time. It didn't work. But to say you failed because you truly lied, or you misled somebody, or something of that nature, right? You committed fraud or something like that. That's an entirely other thing. Or you just purely dropped the ball. That's the thing you want to avoid, because I'm telling you, it will follow you forever. And your name is everything. That business name is everything. So that's one piece of commentary I would share.
I think it's a great point. Is your reputational capital is buildable, but if it's eroded, it's very, very difficult to restore it.
But I love that point about you can fail and still be accountable. And yeah, I think that, and you guys actually have, yeah. It's like, also as students, you have so many opportunities available to you and people who want to back you. And that's the other thing is like, and Mark Cuban they say this on Shark Tank all the time, like, we're investing in you, we're investing in the people. And I used to roll my eyes at it, honestly. I'd be like, but the idea isn't very good. But from the comfort of my couch, it's always easy to say that anonymously. But like, in terms of people really backing an idea, it's also really about you, and it's about they're investing in you. And to be honest, I think like of all the business plan competitions we've done, even at like University of Chicago, like the business plan we pitched and presented to some extent was the one that we followed, but then there are things that just aren't gonna work out, and you kind of change plans accordingly. And nobody, I think, who's ever written a check to LuminAID minds when that happens. The important thing is to just be self-aware about it and be accountable for what comes next.
Okay, so let's talk about those pivots. Everybody know what a pivot is? Maybe you could help us define a pivot for us, Becca, and then tell us about your biggest pivot or your most interesting pivot.
Sure. So a pivot is when you, and I don't know, you guys, I don't have my dictionary. I left my phone back there, but put me on the spot. But it's when you just hit a roadblock or hit a situation in your venture and you pivot and take it in a completely different direction sometimes, or you change an element of it to just be able to continue to grow or tackle the next challenge. Is that right? Is that good?
It's good.
Okay, fantastic. Okay. So I think that I'll just share two quick pivots. When I started my social enterprise 10 years ago in the height of the recession, we, were kind of naive, to be honest. I was, 10, 12 years younger than I am now, and I had this big passion for reading and literacy, and I wanted to start this social enterprise. I didn't know that the recession was literally right behind me. And so we just were like, we're gonna start a nonprofit and it's gonna be awesome. And we have this idea and it's really different and it's awesome. And we were super naive. And we started applying for grants and we're like, we can do this. And we just kept getting no's. Every coffee we had, people looked at us like we were aliens. I mean, it was awful. Everyone was like, this is never gonna work. I just spent a lot of time crying and then wiping my tears with books. And it was awful because I just kept hearing you will never do this, this will fail. And so the pivot, and plus I just didn't understand, I'm gonna just share this because I didn't know this, that when you start a nonprofit, you won't even be eligible for a lot of funding until you're reporting 3 to 4 years of impact metrics. So that's really unfair. I mean, it feels unfair when you're doing the work, but that's the harsh reality is for 3 or 4 years, you might not be able to get funding. So in that moment, we were just getting no's, doors slammed. We were like, we need to pivot and we're gonna create a social enterprise. So my founder and I rented a truck and we drove all over the city of Chicago and we collected used books from anybody that would give them to us. And we, in 1 year, her and I together, I was pregnant, by the way, we gathered 250,000 used books. And we then started to sell them online, which was kind of not new, but kind of a big endeavor to do 10 years ago. And we started a brick and mortar bookstore. And so we kind of took our destiny in our own hands and started selling those books to create the money that we needed to then create the bookstore, to then create our literacy programs to help students learn to read in Chicago. So sometimes the circumstances are forced. People are literally like, you will fail. The recession didn't help either. But I think the pivot is super important because you have to always keep your eyes open for that way that you can make that slight change to keep your dream alive. And don't let anybody tell you no, okay?
Pivot, so just adding on, so I think we're even, I guess we can all give our perspective on what a pivot is. One of the ways I sort of define it is, you're gonna have small failures in your business, right? It's something where you've held yourself accountable, but it just didn't work. You come with assumptions. You think it's gonna work this way. We think this is what the population needs. We think this is what our consumers want. You build the product, you find out nobody actually wants that. But in realizing what they don't want, you come across, but they did like this feature, right? They did say that, they wouldn't buy it as is, but they really like, the green piece of what we built. Okay, maybe we'll just scrap everything else and take the green piece and then just sell that in and of itself. Let's see if that works, right? So again, it's a small failure. It didn't work out with the original product, but you're sort of pivoting as a means to really hone in on the value proposition. The idea is that with each pivot, you're essentially developing a greater product market fit. So that's a better fit between what you're selling and to the people you're selling it to, whether it be consumers, whether it be governments, whether it be schools, whoever, to such an extent to where once you've nailed it, it's so perfect that you don't have any really remaining questions around, do people want to buy this sustainably? You've answered it. We know that. We can go on to other questions. We can essentially hone and scale up our business model now because we've achieved that fit.
And that product market fit, that's sort of the ideal state, right? That you have found perfect product market fit. It's very rare to find that ever. And you will never actually be able to figure out what that is yourself. And I think that's part of what leads to a pivot, as you were just saying. It's also something that you can anticipate and plan and actually act on before you even launch your business. And the way you do that is by talking to your users, your customers, and not just talking to people who think they know your market, but actually talking to the people who are your market and are your users. So if you're doing a product where you've got essentially a complex relationship between the source of the funding and the actual delivery of the service or the product, you need to talk to both of those people and make sure you're providing optimal value with your solution. And I'm curious, I want to turn to you, Andrea. The product that you make, I mean, it's a very well-defined thing, right? And these other products are much more kind of amorphous, but how did you arrive at this being, you know, a square of a certain dimension? I mean, was there a, give us an example of how the input of your customers influenced how you designed this?
Yeah, I think for us, the biggest pivot has probably been in how we've continued to like iterate on our product. There have been other things, like business-wise, but product-wise, we started off with like the original shape of a LuminAID light was more like a bag. That's no better way to say it, but it was like this bag-shaped thing. Like these are all waterproof and they float, and it looked interesting. It just didn't look like a lantern. But as designers, Anna and I loved it because it was simple. There was no wasted material, and we just thought this is the best thing ever. Everyone who says otherwise is wrong. We like pursued that for probably a year or two too long before kind of finally listening to stakeholders, users, customers. It wasn't just the retail buyers, like we have these products in REI and like who were telling us like this, people don't know what this is from the packaging, or they don't know it's a lantern. But it was also even on the humanitarian aid side. I always tell the story, like I remember seeing, we sometimes get like pictures and stories back from the field from all the charitable organizations that have used our lights. And like I remember seeing these pictures now in hindsight, and I should have paid a lot more attention to it, where it would be like kids holding the light, like our lights like this while reading something that was like on the floor or the ground. And in hindsight, really what they were saying was basically, if this sat flat on a table or on the ground, it would be much more useful than holding it up. And so that's how we kind of like, it was putting together all of those different data points to say like, okay, we should actually just make something that packs flat, that sits flat, has this like adjustable strap for hanging. And so we've really iterated on that over time, and we have bigger versions of it now, smaller versions that charge phones. And a lot of those like updates come from just looking into the marketplace where we're selling or where people are using our products and thinking, how can these be even more useful?
Great. So we're now at the point in the program where we're going to turn this back to you to talk to each other for a few minutes. We're going to follow that with some questions for the panel. So you have two objectives in this conversation you're going to have, and you can't move your chair, so you're going to have to turn to the person next to you or to a couple people with you, or if you're agile, you can pivot around and talk to the person behind you. So the first thing is we want some really interesting, juicy questions that are useful to the entire audience. Not self-promotion, not pitching, but questions. And the other thing that I'd like you to talk to each other about is how you will create value and how you would frame that value proposition. And so each of you, pretty much everybody here is working on some sort of commitment, venture, scalable thing, right? So when you ask your question, we want a 15-second statement of what the value that you're creating is, and then you can ask your question. Got that? So you're going to talk about how you're creating value, share that with each other, and hone your 15-second value description and some questions to ask the panel.
What are you defining value as?
That's a good question. So define the value that you are creating with whatever your idea or innovation is from the perspective, and you can choose how you want to present this, but from the perspective of the end user of your service or product, or for the funder who would support your product. Make sense? Okay, ready? Go. Okay, so I'm going to call you back from your discussions. Great to see all the conversation. And I love having to interrupt people when they've gotten to networking. So I think your program has lots of other time for networking, so make sure you exchange cards with the people you started talking to. And we have some folks with microphones who are going to circulate around the room. and we'll take questions until we run out of time here. So we've got about 15 minutes, so lots of time to dive deep into all sorts of different topics that you might want to bring forward. So the format here, remember, is what's your value proposition? And then your question. Questions?
Yes.
Yeah, stand up, tell us who you are and your value proposition.
All right, fine. Hi, I'm Carol. I'm actually trying to make a solar phone 100% that's solar. I'm actually happy that you're a product person and you came. So the perspective is the end user. For me, it's like I get tired of bringing my charger everywhere. I get tired of bringing my Morphe, the charger for the charger everywhere. They both die. Sometimes there's no outlet, so I think it would be a good way just to create a solar phone not only for the consumer market, but also for third world countries where they don't have access to electricity or outlets, and that's able to charge 100% by the sun.
Great.
My question is, I only have a sketch. I have no idea where to start. Where do I just start? Like, where do I get my engineers from? Like, who do I go to?
Great. Thoughts about that? Where did you go?
First of all, that's a great idea. In the meantime, LuminAID makes phone charging solar lanterns in case you need another charger. I don't have it here. I don't have that version of it here with me today. I just give it to you. But I think that's a good question, and it's a hard question. Like, what do you do next after you have an idea, and if you have a physical product? I think you should try your best to leverage the people around you. So my business partner and I have some background in engineering, but I definitely don't. She has more of a background than I do. But when we were students in graduate school, we were actually at Columbia University. The engineering school was right next door. So it was sort of okay, we literally was where do we go next? We walked into the engineering school. So, and universities you don't get that anywhere else outside. We realize now in hindsight, what a great place, an ecosystem in which to have gotten new ideas from people and gotten help with and inputs into things, because you have people who know about every different area pretty much at a university. And in terms of the other part of just the physical thing with the product, even if you don't have the electronics, I think, all worked out, keep prototyping. And even things relative to when we started, things like 3D printing now have become way more accessible, I think, and more effective. When we were in school, it would take I remember probably 30 hours to 3D print something that was this size, and then it would come out and it would be oh, this is amazing, but now it's mind-blowing. So keep prototyping, because you will learn something every time you do that about your physical idea, and keep kind of iterating on it. And outside of that, we use YouTube videos to learn how to solder things, and even all of those types of resources have come a long way too, I think.
Yeah, next question. In the back.
Good afternoon. My name is Steven Tenorio. I am the founder of Advanced Biometrics. We focus on integrating biosensors into clothing to track biometric functions. Then we digitize that and present it as a digital evolution of your health over time. So if anybody has any background in software or patenting or engineering, please. But what I'm getting at would be, when you're pitching to investors, be it an angel investor, a venture capitalist, a firm, how do you decide how much of your company you should essentially be giving out? Because at the end of the day, you're going into debt, promising this idea, as you were saying. So what do you believe would be, I guess, a correct percentage?
Well,
This is
I
the
would say
bootstrap
as
guy.
little as
Yeah,
possible,
we're gonna-
and it's probably contextually specific. So maybe give us an example from.
So I have, a lot of experience in that. It's difficult to answer the question in a precise way. What is a good percentage? The only way to sort of, I think, both answer the question and then give you what actually happens in the real world is, they generally are going to come with the percentage. As soon as you begin asking for money, you no longer have the leverage they're going to tell you how much they will give you for the percentage of your company. Unfortunately, most of us will not be in a position where it's like, look, I want $1 million for X% of my company. They're going to be like, no, we'll give you $1 million for this much. So it's kind of like, it becomes a question of it's going to be what's too much for you. Like giving up this much of my company for this amount, that I think I would be willing to walk away from the deal if I had to do. And I've had to walk away from money. It's like, yes, that's a lot of money. That's 6 figures. But I'm not giving up that much of my company for that. And so it's not objective in the sense that it will sort of be up to you. It's going to be a subjective thing. But just be aware that when you walk into the room, as soon as you're asking for money, you don't have the leverage. Generally, the venture capitalist or the angel investor will say, look, I will give you $50,000 for this much. It's generally not going to be you saying, we will only take this amount.
There are objective processes. So I'd encourage you to learn about term sheets, and there's a whole process for valuation as well that you can use to try and figure out and back into what your company will be worth and how far you are from having it at that worth to back into what it's worth now. And it's seemingly objective. I would say it's one of those subjective areas of business objectivity. But the point that Derrius made about knowing what you think it's worth and what your number is really, really important, because it's very hard once you get into negotiation to be able to walk away and say no, and to be able to sort of know what's worth to you. And in the Shark Tank environment, it's dictated to you, right? They're telling you X for Y%.
Well, so you decide, I think, what you want to offer, and then obviously there's a lot of negotiation that happens on the show. One thing to keep in mind for those of you that watch Shark Tank is they can never offer you less money. So that's the one rule, which is why you'll see most of the time they're negotiating on the equity. Like, I want to take a bigger percentage of your company versus I'll take a smaller percent and offer less money for it. That's not, you can't do that.
Which is a good point, is that there are probably 20 or 30 different ways that the deal can get structured, and some of them may not sound like they're putting you at a disadvantage, but they may actually be creating a very big disadvantage. And then there's other terms that may actually work very much in your favor that you could lean into in order to get a better amount of funding up front. And so there's a lot to do there. The key thing, I think, with this particular space of how do you figure out how much money your company is worth is to get some people who understand how this is done and who have done it before a lot of times. And that's one of those sort of relationships you want to build, and is a reason for getting into some of the kinds of programs that will help you to do that, so that you learn and make the network connections to do that when you're ready. Next question. You have a microphone somewhere? Right here? Whoever gets there first, I guess.
Hi, my name is Genia. I developed a health literacy curriculum, so that's kind of hard to value per se, because it's like individuals are gaining this new knowledge, and that can ultimately lead to decreased costs in the health system in general. But so I guess I have 2 questions on how would you value something that's more of a social benefit and it's less of something that's tangible, and how do you describe that to people such that you can raise money for that commitment?
Yeah, I'm happy to take that one. Congratulations on your venture. I think that is part of the challenge of raising money, for a nonprofit or these intangibles. Like, it could apply to a lot of different factors. I really think the best way is to raise funds off of storytelling, off of the impact. So you can get into, looking up research or metrics or like cost savings or more of the tangible benefits. But when you can really articulately tell the story of a person that you've impacted or an organization that you've impacted because of your education, the benefits that you're providing, that really creates the picture of why they would want to support it. And other people then have that same picture to understand, or that same story to understand why they may also choose to fund it. Storytelling is easier than ever with our video capabilities. photography, all the technology that we have literally in our pockets every day. So I would encourage you to take, all the skills that you have in making your Insta super worthy, to apply that to your venture and think about that through the eyes of the people that you are going to fund you. Is what stories are you going to tell about the impact that you're making?
Next question. Back.
Hi, thank you all so much for sharing all of your advice and wonderful suggestions with us. So my name is Jessie Anderson, and I'm currently working on developing an application for both smartphone and Android, or like Apple and Android applications and technology. And so essentially, if I were to go to, let's say, China for just a vacation, I don't speak Chinese, and so there would be a language barrier present. This language barrier oftentimes will really hinder the experience and take away from the enjoyability of the trip, especially if I'm going to have to find scheduled tours that are generally exorbitantly expensive, and I don't really get an authentic experience. So if we were to create an application where I could find locals who spoke English, who spoke my language, who could actually show me their communities and really give me, an authentic experience as a traveler, while, helping provide a local community with some more revenue, and some, just enhancing the local community through tourism that way. That's essentially what I'm working on doing. So my main question is how did you all figure out, how to create an idea that was both sustainable when it comes to giving back to the planet or giving back to a local community, while making sure that it was also profitable, so social and economic impact?
I think, well, thanks for the description of your product, because I think it's helpful to understand it specifically to your idea for an app. The most important thing, I think, in terms of if you're delivering impact and value, is to talk to the people who are using your product and have them provide that proof for you. Is it having a positive impact? Are your users sort of benefiting from your app? And I mean, we live in a world now where it's like my business sort of, what do we watch most every day these days is like our Amazon reviews, for example, because you will learn very quickly if people are happy or not. And I think using things like that as metrics in terms of just customer reviews is very important. And then, I mean, in terms of the profitability, I think your trick is probably to get to your first paying user as soon as possible. And those two things are kind of linked to your product, basically. If people are deriving value, positive impact and benefit from it, they'll probably be willing to pay for it, so.
And I think the other thing is to make sure that you're following a passion of your own while you're doing that, so that you're able to have that authenticity and be compelling to the people that you want to reach. So we're just about out of time, and I want to take the last closing moments here to encourage you to seek out your passion, to pursue to the ends of the earth the solutions that you need, and to do it by talking to the people who are going to be your users and your customers. I think we've heard some outstanding examples of people who have done that and scaled their ventures in phenomenal ways. They're really just getting started, and I think we're going to continue to hear more about them. But join me in thanking them for their wisdom and thought. Thank you.